It was the late afternoon of May 26, 1941. The weather over the North Atlantic was brutal. Low clouds, squalls of rain, winds screaming across the waves. The German battleship Bismarck, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, was making a desperate run for safety. Ahead lay the occupied French coast, and the protection of the Luftwaffe. If she reached it, Britain's fragile Atlantic lifeline would be in mortal danger. But then, a sound above the storm. From the grey sky they came, slow, outdated, almost laughably fragile. A flight of British Fairey Swordfish biplanes. Open cockpit, fabric wings, barely faster than an old car on the motorway. The Bismarck's anti-aircraft guns roared, filling the sky with shrapnel. And yet, against all odds, one of these lumbering relics was about to decide the fate of the most powerful warship in the Atlantic, in a single moment. This is the story of the 15 minutes that doomed the Bismarck. Just 4 days earlier, the Bismarck had slipped out into the Atlantic with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. Their mission was clear: hunt down and destroy Allied merchant shipping. Britain, an island nation, depended on those supplies. In 1941, the Battle of the Atlantic was a fight for survival. If German surface raiders and U-boats could choke off convoys from America and the Empire, Britain might be forced to the negotiating table. The Bismarck was a terrifying weapon for this mission. At over 50,000 tons fully loaded, she was one of the largest and most modern battleships afloat. Her 8 15-inch guns could fire shells weighing nearly a ton over 20 miles. She was heavily armored, with a belt up to 320 millimeters thick, and in her first major action, she had already shown what she could do. On the morning of May 24th, in the Denmark Strait, she faced HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales. The engagement lasted barely 10 minutes. A shell from Bismarck struck the Hood's aft magazine. In a single, devastating explosion, Britain's most famous warship was torn in half and sank within minutes. Over 400 men died, only 3 survived. The loss of the Hood stunned Britain. It wasn't just a naval defeat, it was a psychological blow, striking at national pride. Prime Minister Winston Churchill reacted immediately. His order to the Royal Navy was simple and absolute: sink the Bismarck. But the German ship was already pulling away. She had taken a hit in the earlier battle that ruptured a fuel tank, forcing her to abandon her mission. Admiral Lutyens decided to make for the safety of occupied France. Once there, she could be repaired and protected by German air cover. The Royal Navy knew they had a narrow window to act. Over the next 2 days, British ships and aircraft combed the Atlantic. At one point, they lost contact completely, leading to frantic maneuvers and desperate searches. But by the morning of May 26th, a Catalina flying boat spotted her again, 400 miles from the French coast. Time was running out. Surface ships couldn't close the gap in time. The only chance lay with the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal and her squadron of Swordfish torpedo bombers. The Swordfish looked like something from another age. They were biplanes, double wings, open cockpits, canvas and wire. Their maximum speed was just 138 miles per hour. In a war of Spitfires and Messerschmitts, they seemed hopelessly obsolete. And yet they had a strange advantage. Their slow speed made them stable torpedo platforms and surprisingly hard to hit for anti-aircraft guns, which were calibrated for faster targets. At 7:10 p.m., 15 Swordfish lifted off into the storm. The wind was so strong that some planes nearly stalled on takeoff. Spray lashed the pilots' goggles. Icing threatened the controls. But the crews pressed on. Each carried a single 18-inch Mark 12 torpedo, capable of tearing through a battleship's hull. They approached low, just above the waves, hoping to avoid detection. The first the Bismarck's crew knew of them was the drone of engines, followed by shapes emerging from the gloom. The ship's anti-aircraft batteries opened up immediately. Tracer fire stitched the sky. Shell bursts sent shrapnel slicing past the Swordfish cockpits. From above, the Bismarck looked like a fortress afloat, bristling with guns, turning sharply to avoid the incoming torpedoes. The first attack wave came in from the starboard side. Torpedoes hit the water with a splash, their wake streaming towards the target. Bismarck heeled over, combing the tracks. One struck her armored belt, but the damage was minimal. The second wave came in from port. More torpedoes, more violent evasive turns. The gunners on Bismarck poured fire into the slow-moving biplanes, and the Swordfish pilots weaved desperately to survive. Then came the decisive attack. One plane, flown by Lieutenant Commander John Moffat, lined up on the Bismarck's stern. He dropped to mast height, skimming the surface, spray hammering his goggles. the ship's tracers whipped past. At 800 yards, he released his torpedo. It hit near the stern on the port side. The explosion was not spectacular. No towering geyser, no massive breach in the hull. But deep within the ship, the blast jammed the rudder hard to port. At first, the crew didn't understand. Helm orders were met with confusion as the ship refused to answer. The engineers tried to free the rudder. Divers went over the side, risking the freezing Atlantic. Nothing worked. Bismarck was locked into a slow, helpless turn. Lütjens knew instantly what it meant. Without steering, the Bismarck could not escape. She was now at the mercy of the British fleet. Through the night, British destroyers shadowed her, darting in for torpedo attacks, forcing her to maneuver, which only made her circle wider. At dawn, the battleships King George V and Rodney closed in. At point-blank range, they poured shell after shell into her, smashing superstructure, guns, and crew alike. By mid-morning, the pride of the German Navy was a burning wreck. At 10:39 a.m., she slipped beneath the waves, taking over 2,000 men with her. The rudder strike was more than just a lucky hit. It changed the entire course of the Battle of the Atlantic. Had the Bismarck reached France, she would have been repaired and ready to sortie again. Alongside her sister ship, Tirpitz, she could have tied up vast British resources, threatening convoys in the Atlantic and Arctic. Every ton of supplies sunk brought Britain closer to starvation. Every convoy diverted to avoid German surface raiders weakened the war effort elsewhere. The psychological effect was just as important. The destruction of the Hood had been a huge blow to British morale. If Bismarck had escaped unscathed after such a victory, it would have been a propaganda triumph for Nazi Germany, emboldening the Kriegsmarine and shaking Allied confidence. Instead, the Royal Navy proved it could hunt down and destroy even the most powerful warship in the world. For the Germans, the loss was devastating. Hitler became increasingly wary of risking major surface ships in the Atlantic. After Bismarck, the German Navy shifted focus even more heavily towards U-boats, conceding that their surface fleet could not challenge British naval dominance. And so, in the space of 15 minutes, the trajectory of the Atlantic War shifted. Not because of a mighty battleship's guns, but because of a handful of men in fabric-covered biplanes, flying through wind and rain, trusting that one torpedo, one hit, could make the difference. The story of the Bismarck's rudder strike is a reminder that war is rarely decided solely by the biggest guns or the thickest armor. It's decided by moments, by decisions, by acts of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. And in this case, those acts came from open cockpits, in aircraft older than many of the men who flew them. Against all logic, they succeeded. Because without those 15 minutes in the storm, the Bismarck might have reached safety. The war at sea might have been far more costly for the Allies. And the Battle of the Atlantic might have taken a very different turn. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the story of the Bismarck, there's plenty more history just like it. The moments that turn the tide, the decisions that shape the world, and the untold details that bring them to life. I've got more incredible World War II stories coming very soon, so make sure you don't miss them. Hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and you'll be first to see the next one. Until then, thanks for watching and keep exploring history's defining moments.